So, for everyone joining in, we're joined tonight by Lieutenant Shur, who is, well, what's your title? What's your official title?
So, hello everyone. My official title is that I'm the head of the IDF's International Social Media Department, which basically means that I am in charge of the IDF's TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, and every other social media you can find for the international audience.
That's quite the role to have. So, before we get into anything about Iran and the conflict, how long have you been with the army now?
So I drafted in 2019. I actually drafted as a soldier into the same department I am running today, which is quite the closure. I did a couple positions, went to Officers Academy, in Guardian of the Walls. I was an international media advisor to the general staff. Then I was the chief of staff to the deputy spokesperson. Did a couple other positions and landed here about 18 months ago.
Wow, that's amazing. And how has it been in the role since the war began? I mean, I'm sure your workload has gotten tremendously high.
So I think it's definitely been the most challenging period of my service, and in most of the IDF service people service, it's definitely been challenging to kind of tell the story of the IDF, tell the story of the people, tell the story of the civilians, and the casualties that we suffered on October 7th. But I also have to say that it's been the most gratifying period to be in the military because you get to tell the story of other people in the military and you get to tell the story of people who are no longer with us, unfortunately.
It's definitely incredibly important work. I want to talk a bit about the Iranian attack, which has been on everyone's mind. First, give me like the background. How was it with the lead up and with all that anticipation that was growing to this attack?
So on April 13th, in the evening, we announced limitations to the home front because the first thing that Israel prioritizes is the safety of our civilians. So we posted limitations on the home front, including social gatherings, educational facilities. It's actually Passover vacation already for the younger kids. So no school and no summer camps, which upset a lot of parents. But as I said, we prioritize the safety of our civilians. And around the early hours of the night, Iran fired approximately 350 objects at Israel. Most of them were fired from Iran, but they were fired also from Iraq, from Yemen, from Lebanon, and from Syria. It was a coordinated attack. They fired at us about 60 tons of explosives, which is an insane amount, and it doesn't really register with people. It's not 350 small rockets. It's 350 ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, explosive drones, and UAV. And that happened on April 3rd. Then, together with a coalition of international partners, among them the Great Britain, France, and the U.S. Central Command, we intercepted 99% of these objects. And most of them were intercepted actually outside of Israeli airspace.
Wow, I mean, 60 tons, that's crazy. I'm trying to think of an equivalent even. What would that type of, if, let's say, God forbid, they did get through, what type of damage would that have even caused?
So we actually tried to make the equivalent. I can say that it's the equivalent of an earthquake, the magnitude of about a 7.2. It's the equivalent of a modern small nuclear bomb,
Wow.
among others. And yeah.
Wow, that's intense. So, I mean, that leads on sort of to the whole interception situation. I mean, how was that coordinating with, first of all, so many allies and dealing with so many targets? How does that even work on a logistical scale?
So I won't get too much into how we coordinated with our partners. Some partners I mentioned, but there are others as well. It's important to note that Israel on its own has has a very advanced aerial defense array. We have several systems that were developed in Israel and were developed in partnership with the U.S. So I think the most famous one is obviously the Iron Dome. But we also have the Arrow system and the Patriot system and others as well, and the David Sling, of course. And all of those were engaged during the attack. We also had squadrons, the Air Force squadron in the air intercepting different objects as well. They were in the air alongside our partners in the international coalition. And it was a very, very complicated operation, but it was carried out in a remarkable manner, the first of its kind in modern warfare.
Yeah, I mean, actually touching on the Air Force part, what we heard is that almost all the Air Force was actually in the air at that time.
I I am unable to comment on our operational capabilities.
That's fair. Totally understandable. And I mean, with the whole situation is remarkable. Like you said, first of its kind ever. What would you say is the main takeaway from this? Like, if anything, for the army?
I think the main takeaway, as we can see, is that we are prepared and willing to do everything to protect our own. And when you actually look at where the projectiles came from, you can see that Iran put millions of civilians at risk even before their projectiles made it close to Israeli airspace. They put millions of civilians that have nothing to do with this conflict between Iran, its proxies, and Israel. And they were willing to put all of these people at risk to take revenge or to exercise their claim of self-defense against Israel. And Israel did the exact opposite. We were willing to put everything on the line to protect our own civilians. And I think that's something that was evident in all of Israel's history, and that's something that will continue accompanying us for the rest of our history.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, they definitely did put civilians at risk. Those rockets came from mainland Iran, right?
It came from several locations in Iran, and I think that it's important to understand that when we're talking about a 99% successful interception rate, it doesn't mean that there are zero objects that didn't engage in the Israeli airspace. There actually is a 7-year-old girl, a Bedouin girl, that is severely injured and is still fighting for her life since Saturday night, or actually Sunday early morning. Unfortunately, the interception rate is not 100%, and Israeli civilians, that specific girl was injured, and there was light damage to one Air Force base, only to infrastructure, of course. No aircraft were harmed,
Yeah,
but it's important to know that the interception rate is not one.
I mean, we also got reports of rockets that had, or I should say, missiles. I'm so used to Gaza, with rockets only, that had landed actually short. Some of them in Iraq, some of them elsewhere as well. And I know that probably you can't really speak to that since it's other countries, but do you have any comment with regards to that? I'm curious.
I think that the thing I can say, and that is very important to understand, that when we're talking about an international coalition, it means that several countries across the globe understand that Iran is not a threat to Israel. It's a global threat. It's a threat to the Middle East, and it's willing to put any civilian that is standing in their way, and it doesn't matter their nationality or their religion. They're willing to put anyone at risk for their fight to end free will and to end freedom of the Western world.
Yeah, it's a scary thought, for sure. And a big thing that we saw when Pikuda Orov came out with that sort of, in a way, dramatic message after Shabbat, was panic. People saying, "Okay, finally, this is it." What do you recommend for people who need to cope with that and for anything that happens in the future to understand, okay, how do we look at this realistically and deal with that panic?
So I think the discipline of the Israeli public for the past 6 months has been extraordinary. Needs to stay the same. We need to understand that what the home front says is meant to guard our lives and the lives of our loved ones. And it's not meant to cause mass panic. It's meant to prepare the public for the worst case scenario and to make sure that we minimize any possibilities for damage in civilian areas. And of course, as the military or as the body that is in charge for the safety of Israeli civilians, we would always prefer to not get involved with our civilians' life. But when it comes to the debate of limiting movement or putting their lives at risk, we would prefer to go for the worst case scenario and limit and go with the stricter restrictions to minimize possible damage to civilians. And of course, I understand the mass panic that happened in Israel. And it's also important to note that what Iran does and has been doing with Israel for years is this psychological warfare game. And I think that it can't be disregarded in the way the Israeli public has been feeling. And still, the discipline of Israelis when it came to the home front regulations and the fact that everyone went to shelters, went to public shelters, those who don't have bomb shelters in their houses or apartments went to the public shelters is extraordinary. And it allows the IDF actually to take the necessary risk because we can depend on our civilians that they're willing to listen to what we have to say and to our guidelines so we can exercise and so we can do what we need to do.
Yeah, and we definitely saw that the fact that everybody went to shelter really minimized the amount of casualties in the end, and given the amount of rockets that were fired, it's a miracle. And I know something that people really talk about a lot is the fact that RF last night, or I should say earlier this morning at midnight, raised the restrictions and said that schools or educational facilities can reopen, and restrictions went back to prior to the Iranian attack, and people were quite, I would say, sort of upset by the fact that only hours earlier they had said the restrictions would stay. So is there anything you can tell us about that sort of flip-flop that happened?
So again, as I said, I think we would always prefer to take the stricter route. And in the IDF, we are always conducting these operational status and operational situational updates. And the moment the operational situation allowed us to kind of relieve the limitations on the home front, we announced it to the public the moment it was approved. And I think it's only a safety measure to make sure our civilians are as safe as possible. And I understand that frustration in the public that it was only announced at midnight. But as I said, it's always better to be safe than sorry.
Mm-hmm. And what about the future? I mean, given the fact that we're still, as many put it in the government, not out of the woods, in terms of a response or anything like that, what can be expected by the public?
So, as I said, the home front keeps updating the public on what what are the guidelines and if there are any limitations. I do recommend to those in Israel to download the home front app, because as we've seen in recent operational developments, sometimes the IDF uses GPS scrambling techniques to confuse the enemy, and that might cause a distortion in different apps or in Telegram channels if you use those. And the Homefront command has the option to add an area of interest. Mm-hmm. So if you're in a specific location, if you download the Homefront app, you can add an area of interest, and then it doesn't matter if there's any GPS scrambling, you will still be notified if there is a siren in your area. It doesn't matter the kind. So that I do recommend to those in Israel or to those who have a specific interest in specific areas in Israel. And when it comes to yes a response or no response, I think that, as we've said, we are on the highest alert possible. We have been for 6 months since the war with Hamas started, and we're continuously evaluating the situation. I won't comment on if there will be or won't be a response, but I will say that Iran has been waging war against Israel for decades now, and this is just the first time they fired and took action from their own land, not the first act of aggression committed by Iran. As I said, they fired from their proxies, from Lebanon, from Iraq, from Yemen, from Syria, and from Lebanon. Proxies who have been committing acts of aggression against Israel in the last 6 months specifically, but for the past 4 decades as well. So when we're talking about a response, we've been in an armed conflict with Iran for years now.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned the proxies thing because during the UN meeting last night, they had said that they don't have any proxies, which is always interesting for them to say things like that. And I think that no matter what happens, if there's a response or not, do you have any sort of advice or anything that could be given to people about, how to not panic and how to prepare and anything of that sort?
I'll tell you what I told my parents. Always stay calm and remember Israel has faced many, many enemies in our time, and we've always came out on top. So I think if there's one thing I can say is to stay calm and to trust that the IDF and the state of Israel and our allies will do whatever is necessary to keep the country safe and to keep the civilians safe. And that basically whatever is that unfolds or happens in any arena, by the way, not necessarily with Iran, when you're looking at any of the operational arenas, the IDF can do whatever is necessary of us in order to meet the goals of the war or goals of any operational activity that is set.
And any final things that you want to talk about before we open it up to questions or mention?
I think it's important to note the fact that this operation is largely successful because of this international cooperation. And I think there might have been a feeling or this narrative going around that Israel is alone or Israel is facing backlash. But I think that true allies are tested in times of need. And this coalition and our partnership with international countries, with other countries, has been proven on April 13th, where we faced an enemy that is an enemy for all of the Western world and all of the free world, and we faced it together. And I think that that's a very important takeaway from this.
Yeah, and actually, I wanted to ask about the coalition. What are the future plans for anything like that? Is it something that we'll see more in the future, the working together?
I think it very much depends on our cooperation with our allies and the operational situation.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, because it's fascinating. I have to say it was the most incredible thing to read about the fact that so many nations came together to protect the country. I definitely have not ever seen anything like that before. And
Definitely.
so I want to open up for questions, and I hope people will send them in. But I have to say that so far, instead of questions, we have many, many people who are speaking praises of you and saying keep up the good work. And of course, a lot of thank yous for all the work that you're doing and the Army is doing. But if
Thank you.
anyone has any questions, please do send it now, and we'll be sure to ask.
I will give, I haven't mentioned it before, a kind of more accurate breakdown of the projectiles that were, the
Oh,
objects that were
please.
fired at us. So obviously it's an approximate, some were lost in the way, but we're talking about approximately 170 Iranian explosive UAVs launched, about 30 Iranian cruise missiles, and about 120 ballistic missiles.
So the total, you said, explosive power was 60 tons, right?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Approximately.
Approximately, yeah. And based on my understanding, not a single drone entered into Israeli airspace, correct?
The UAVs, yes. Zero managed to infiltrate into Israel. But again, that means infiltrated. There is shrapnel and
Yeah, of
different
course.
parts that might have landed inside Israel, but none infiltrated Israeli airspace.
Can you tell us a little about the timeline? I mean, I don't know if you were necessarily there, but the reaction maybe, how it was when, it was first seen that this would be coming.
I will say we were on high alert and we responded very quickly, and the biggest evidence to that is the fact that almost none of the objects entered Israeli airspace at all and were intercepted outside of Israel's territory. So that will tell you quite a bit about our
Yeah.
response.
So I see one question that we have, like we have quite a few comments, but right here from Mayor Zaks, he says pro-Iranians say that without the coalition, Israel would not be able to defend itself. What do you think? Would our interception rate dwindle without our allies?
So, unfortunately, I'm not very good at math and statistics. I do spokesperson and communications, but I think that some of our partners have put out statements of the amount of objects that they intercepted, and I think you can do the math yourselves as to what's the percentage of interceptions that Israel made, and it's very, very high. So it might not have necessarily been 99%, but the rate of interception that Israel could have achieved is very high.
Yeah, I think we saw one statistic from the U.S. that said that only 3 to 4 ballistic missiles were intercepted by the U.S. So that tells you something out of the total. A question here from Ellie Wolbram: how do you balance needing to be trendy, funny, and relevant on social media while under the context of the often unjustifiably hated on IDF?
So I think it's the daily dilemma of a social media manager. I will say that we have quite a lot of platforms. And I will say that specifically on Twitter, we have taken more of the official role of operational updates and kind of giving people real-time operational updates and information that they need. I will never turn down an opportunity to kind of put a media outlet in its place if something is reported as false. But we also have to remember that we are an army on a social media platform. If we don't talk the language of the platform, then we don't we don't use the platform to our advantage if we don't have the following to kind of put the relevant information out there. There are platforms where it's more challenging, like TikTok or like Instagram, for instance, that are more lighthearted and targeted at younger audiences. But we always kind of try and find this happy medium. And if we make a mistake, then we know to apologize if we offended anyone and carry on with our days.
Mm-hmm. And actually, related to that, when it comes to TikTok especially, how do you balance that? Because I know they're quite harsh on the side of dealing with their terms of services and making sure everything fits. And if you go out of line, they'll very quickly remove your account. So how is that with balancing that?
So obviously we respect the guidelines of every platform, and we have adapted our content to every platform. And it's not necessarily our interest to put very graphic content that doesn't fit the language of the platform on any specific platform, because we're not doing our job properly as digital marketing people. But on TikTok, we focus on more human-based content. We, at the end of the day, are an army of the people of Israel, and the people of Israel are not scary and not anything that might have been portrayed in recent months. So we try and put more people in front of the camera and share their human stories and their human experiences, and not necessarily explosives and guns and munitions found inside hospitals in Gaza, but the soldier behind the operation in the hospital in Gaza.
Yeah, I think people stories are incredibly important, especially now, and putting a face to those stories. An interesting question from Rudy Eastman. We heard so many planes flying overhead, it must have felt like the movie Top Gun to all those pilots. How did they keep from smacking into each other up there?
If you've ever seen the Independence Day parade, I hear it's quite a thing on the 4th of July in the US as well, but they're very much well practiced in flying very close to one another, and they have very, very advanced comm systems. And if you look actually at in the war in Gaza, we actually have a close coordination between infantry and air force as well. So if a tank and an airplane know how to not shoot at one another, then two airplanes know how to not crash into one another as well. And we have very, very advanced comm systems and intelligence surveillance systems for that purpose.
I'm sure it also involves a lot on the ground as well, right? Coordinating with all those pilots from what they call the pit.
Yes.
That's very incredible that on top of that, with also allies dealing with maneuvering around that as well. Another question we have: how do you stay present in the moment of attack to be able to go into work mode? Ellie Wolbram says, I know personally when our family had to go into a mamad, I have to balance dealing with that on a personal level while also being a husband and a parent, and it's challenging. How do you do it in these greater shoes?
I'll add another aspect to that. I actually have 30 soldiers under my command, so I have to be a civilian, a professional, and a commander, not a parent yet. But I feel like it's kind of similar on some days. But I feel like that once you understand the gravity of your professional role and your position in this huge system that is currently operating, you understand that you have to put your personal feelings or your personal emotions, or at least in my personal experience, every person is different, but my personal experience, I put my emotions on pause for a bit, understand that understand that I have a purpose and a goal and a position to do at the moment, and other people to support, and then deal with everything else sometime else.
Yeah, and when it comes to really tense situations, I mean, that must be pretty tough. Like that with the Iranian attacks, um were you there? Like were you called into base, so to speak?
I was on base. I was actually on base many hours before, coincidentally. I will say that the knowing that you're going through the same thing as so many other people that are surrounding you is kind of comforting in a way. And I think that maybe the people I'm surrounded with were kind of messed up in the same way, but it's a lot more challenging and a lot more mentally challenging to deal with the story of the hostages when you know that you have 133 hostages in Gaza, but you still know that you are the person that is telling their story, whether it be in traditional media and interviews and briefings or in digital or in social media. That's the moment where you know for sure that your emotional and personal feelings are the fuel for your professional role that you're feeling. And I think that's kind of that transition that we have become very adapted and very good at in recent months.
Anna Laura Gomez says, um, does continuously reposting of the pro-Israel content on TikTok really help?
I think you mean like as a private person, does it help the effort? If
Yeah,
I understand. Yeah. Um, I think that it does. I think that at the end of the day, we or any other big Israeli account has the professional or the official reach. But if you're a part of another community, of a local community, then you have a different circle, a more tight, closer circle of influence. And if you share what is happening in Israel or what you feel that resonates with you, that is happening in Israel or in that realm, then you have a direct way of influencing people that you're surrounded with. So I think that sharing content is certainly helpful and is certainly another way that we can kind of shift the narrative.
and what's the best platform for that type of thing, would you say? I mean, like you said, the IDF has so many. What's the best for sharing the content?
It's like asking a parent who's their favorite child. I feel like it kind of depends on what content more speaks to you.
Mhm.
As I said, Twitter is more sarcastic and operational updates. Instagram is very Instagrammy, if that kind of makes
Yeah,
sense.
totally.
We have a website if you prefer more long-term content. We have a great podcast that I encourage everyone to listen to that gives kind of more in-depth explanations about different positions in the military and different operations in the military as well. A YouTube channel. And there's multiple platforms. And again, it doesn't have to be the IDF's content that if that's not what you're if that's not the type of message you want to put out. At the end of the day, we're military. Most of our content is military based, but there are amazing accounts that do great work as well, and content that is more based on the civilians on the home front, more based on personal stories, more based on the casualties or on different enemies that kind of find your own voice and tone in this influx of content.
And an interesting question from Sharon Murder Green. She says, even with all your amazing efforts and the efforts of many others, it seems like Israel's losing the social media war. Is there any hope, any way to turn that around? And if so, how?
I feel like we can't think in terms of winning and losing because we're not addressing the social media effort or in general the public opinion as a war. At the end of the day, we're here to portray our side of things, our message, and our takeaways, and we're not here to win anyone over or to convince or to convert people. That's not what we're here to do. We're here to give our side of things. And at the end of the day, Iran, and their proxies have a very well equipped and running propaganda machine on their end. A lot of accounts. It might seem as if you're kind of alone in your own space. That is in your opinion, but it's not necessarily that way. We're just kind of playing it more fair than what the other side is.
Yes, very well said. So, with all those different questions, I feel like we touched on a lot of different topics. What do you have to say in closing? How would you summarize this all up?
First of all, I want to thank everyone that joined this conversation and to everyone who's been supporting our efforts, whether it be vocally or just with yourself in the last 6 months and in general. I know these are stressful times, but I feel like it's important for me to say out there, please stick to official reports and to official channels if you're curious about what is happening. Not because I want to gain more followers, because I want to make sure you get as much sleep and are less anxious in your lives. Because there's so much happening and so many conflicting reports happening that it's important to double check your sources. And what I want to say is that as we've proved time and time again, and as we've proved on April 13th, we're able to get over many, many challenges and have faith in the IDF and in Israel.
There we go.
And happy Passover to everyone who is celebrating. I know I'm a bit early, but as I said, schools are already out.
Thank you so much for your time. And I think everyone here is very thankful. We even continue now to get lots of messages of thanks and appreciation for the Army. So thank you all for tuning in today. And like I said before, this will be recorded. So don't worry, we'll have it up there. So anyone who missed it or if you want to send it around, you can. And thank you all very much.